Hey everybody, welcome to the Jim Masters Show live entertainment lifestyle celebrity talk show series. Adam Nedeff is here, and here he comes in 3, 2, 1. There he is. And we don't want to bother him. He's just happened to be reading.
Wow, this is such a good book. Oh, hi. I didn't hear you come in.
Oh,
No,
hi. Dun, 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 dun.
thank you. Thank you very much for those nice words. I didn't.
Come on down.
I got all of my books off the shelf to be able to show them off, and I didn't realize you were going to do the slideshow at the beginning.
I
So thank you
tell
very much
you.
for doing that.
Absolutely. Well, you can absolutely pull any of them that you want, and you can show them up
Sure.
close and personal. But
Yeah.
first, before any of this, tell us about this room that you're in, because it is like a museum unto itself there in the town that now houses
Yeah.
the studio for The Price is Right, Glendale,
Yeah,
California.
this is a room that I'd like to think it's a lot neater than it looks. I started collecting game show home games. People would give them to me as gifts, or I would find them at flea markets. And then, oddly enough, the thing that really caused them to explode was the pandemic. Um, a group of friends and I began doing nightly game sessions over Zoom just as a social outlet. So, what I would do every night at about 6 p.m. my time was I would set up the camera that I'm using right now, and I would set up my headset and a table. And I would play a game show home version using my friends in other cities as the contestants. And it was just a good thing to keep everyone occupied and give someone to look forward to and give us all something to do during the pandemic. But just to give everybody, a variety of games, I began kind of splurging on eBay. So the collection really exploded because of that. And I've got various memorabilia. I've got autographs up here. I've got a few props. And there's a 3D printer on Etsy who's designing replicas of the Price is Right set now, and those are very impressive. And now that Pluto is airing the shopping era episodes of Wheel of Fortune, I'm proud to show this off. This is my ceramic Dalmatian. I worked at Wheel of Fortune for one season, and for Christmas that year, everybody at Wheel of Fortune got a ceramic Dalmatian. So that's my memento from my time working on that show.
That is so cool. You know who loves seeing that, Adam?
Who?
Absolutely loves seeing it? Gilligan. Gilligan loves that. Matter of fact, he wants to come over and play.
And just because the people who lose on game shows are special too, I also have an authentic 70s bottle of turtle wax and an 80s box of Lee press-on nails here too. So I figured every game show fan should own that.
Do you have the rice-a-roni in the cabinet?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. From 1979.
Yeah. It's actually, I try to keep this room fairly neat because I have a roommate and I want to respect her. And it's actually a little bit more cluttered than it is right now because this doesn't happen very often, but every now and then you get 4,000 photos dropped in your lap and you have to spend your spare time scanning them.
Kind
Shelley
of chokes
Herman,
you up, doesn't it?
yeah, Shelley Herman, who has been a guest on your show,
Yes.
just called me up and she found a box somewhere in her house that was just every photo ever taken on the set of Liars Club from 1976
wow.
to 1979. And she asked, "Well, do you want them?" Which, yeah. So, so I've been frantically scanning these things and digitizing the negatives and going through all the slides here, and it adds up to at least 4,000 pictures, maybe more. But that's been my spare time all this week.
Wow. Going through all of that, huh?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Is it a
And
24/7 situation for you? Is it something that calls upon? I mean, working in these industries, I know myself how this can really pull at you 24/7 because broadcast is a 24/7
it
business.
it can kind of by choice, just because you want to answer that phone while it's ringing. You don't know when people are going to stop contacting you. So I really do try to answer as many requests for my contributions as possible, whether that's working on a show for Game Show Network or one of these little side gigs. But also, I'm just a collector of the stuff, and whether those things need scanned or not, I would want the photos of Liars Club. So Shelley made that offer to me, and I was happy to take them just to go through them.
Isn't
And it
that
really is kind of a
fantastic?
neat window into about 3 years worth of television, where you have very, very young David Letterman sitting on the panel for about 7 weeks of this show.
Hmm.
You've got people like Dodie Goodman and Andy Griffith and McLean Stevenson and Larry Hovis, all sitting and chatting and having a good time. And Liars Club is it's one of the shows that I'm fond of from
Oh,
from television's
yes.
past.
From that period of time. Absolutely.
Yeah.
You, like I did, majored in television and radio, and you did at Marshall University. You spent a few years toiling as a disc jockey before moving to LA to see if you could make a career out of your childhood obsessions. You had
Yep.
mentioned working behind the scenes for numerous television game shows, including The Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune, College Bowl, and Double Dare. You're now an archivist and researcher for the National Archives of Game Show History at the Strong Museum of Play in Rochester, New York. Also a producer for that group's Oral Histories series, which is really terrific. And with encouragement from late night star Conan O'Brien, you finally began writing books about game show history, starting with Quizmaster, a comprehensive biography of beloved game show host Bill Cullen, and all these other titles we've been talking about. And you've also been heard on NPR, and TV viewers in Canada have seen you on Game TV's The Search for Canada's Game Shows. You've also been quoted and featured in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, Mental Floss, Rolling Stone, and the AV Club. Love it. Love it. It's all tying together. But you grew up in Vienna, West Virginia.
Yes.
And you spent your childhood infinitely more interested in late night comedy and game shows than the afternoon cartoons.
Yeah.
So where did that come from? What was the early inspiration growing up in West Virginia that spurred things on for you?
I really don't know. I've only come to learn in the last few years that my mother watched a lot of game shows before I was born, and she's not a fanatic about it, but every now and then she'll mention something about watching Hollywood Squares before I was born, or mentioning some other game shows. So it was in the bloodstream a little bit, but not to the degree that I took it. I do know that I was kind of a shy kid, and a lot of the kids in the neighborhood were my brother's friends. So, and there was a 5-year age difference between us. So my brother and I didn't exactly go out and play. He was 9 and I was 4 years old. So there wasn't a lot that we could do together. So that left me with watching a lot of TV. And game shows are bright colors and noises and sound effects and music, and in the case of Press Your Luck, the animated whammies. In the case of Wheel of Fortune, the bright, colorful wheel spinning around and around. There's a lot of sensory stuff to reach out to a kid. So I think that's what got my attention initially, was just the surroundings, the environment, the atmosphere of game shows. But also I remember really, really liking the hosts. I really liked Bob Barker and Pat Sajak. And I remember watching Bill Cullen on Hot Potato. And those were my guys when I was a kid.
Yeah.
Mark Summers I was really into because I was of that age. I was just starting to discover game shows when Double Dare came along. And here was a show that was not just a game show, but also a place for kids to be kids.
That's right.
Just the perfect show for me to get addicted to the genre on, and it just kind of ballooned from there. The big life-changing thing for me was the internet in the mid-90s, because even as a kid I was under the impression that liking game shows was a weird, one-of-a-kind, out there thing. And I got on the internet and I just kind of noodled around to see what I could find about game shows, and I found game show fan message boards and game show fan websites. And I did this double take, and I'm like, there are other people out there who were interested in what I'm interested in.
Right.
And what I knew about game shows, I knew I liked game shows, but what I knew about the genre could fill a thimble. So I just began learning and learning and learning from all these things that I was reading about, from all the things that were online. And going to the library, that kind of sparked me to go to the library. And I didn't find out until way, way after it was published that there had been an encyclopedia of TV game shows. So the internet was a big deal for me, because that's how I discovered this was a passion that I could actually dig into and really learn something from, and really invest time in. And so that just became my life from that point forward.
Growing up, what were the game shows that you admired the most? I know you mentioned the hosts, Bob Barker and Bill Cullen and some of the others. Did you have a favorite game show early on? And what are some of your favorites today?
I would say my gateway show. That's always a term that I use for the show that got you addicted. And I think my gateway show was Wheel of Fortune, because Wheel of Fortune, the thing about Wheel of Fortune is it's the first thing that I can remember being good at. I remember watching that show with my parents and my grandparents, and all of them being completely amazed at how quickly this toddler could solve puzzles that were sometimes names in the news or sometimes titles of movies that I couldn't possibly have on my radar. But I was really good at solving the puzzles on Wheel of Fortune, and to have an adult compliment you for being really good at that is you kind of want to chase that dragon when you're a toddler.
Right.
So Wheel of Fortune was the first show I got really addicted to. It was the first game show home game that I owned, and my grandfather made me a little cardboard toy Wheel of Fortune, and it was a very sweet thing. It was
That's
the
cool.
toy that came with the meal at Hardee's,
Oh,
and
yes.
it was a Winnie the Pooh thing, but it spun, but on the back it was completely blank. So
Wow.
I had a spinning thing, and it had a blank backside to it. So my grandfather took some markers and a ruler, and he made the back of it a Wheel of Fortune, and so I could play Wheel of Fortune with this thing that I got at Hardee's. So that was my first game show toy. And you saw it in one of the photos, and I have it sitting right here next to the desk. I'm not sure you're going to be able to see it, but I upgraded in the years since. For my birthday a couple of years ago, I kept a promise that I made to myself when I was 5. And some very nice gentlemen in upstate New York built this for me on commission. And it's a Wheel of Fortune. And it is it's authentic to the wheel layout of the 1986 Deluxe Edition home game for anyone who's keeping track. And it has interchangeable wedges so you can upgrade the money amounts as the game goes along.
Big money,
And
big
yeah,
money, big
yes,
money.
exactly. Um,
Oh.
but yeah, it's about 2 feet wide, made of
Wow.
very, very sturdy material. It's steel and plexiglass,
Cool,
and
huh?
it fits easily into a corner when you're done with it. So that's the thing that I pull out for people to play games with whenever they come over to visit now.
Yeah,
Um,
so cool.
yeah.
We're just, as I always say, we are just adults in kids' clothing. That's all. Big kids' clothing. That's all it is. When I was a kid, we, believe it or not, uh, built a replica in the basement of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood.
Really?
Yeah.
All right, we have a lot to talk about then.
I loved the open I loved the show, and maybe that's the affiliation with PBS all these years working with them, but um, just that open and that close. And I'm still, I have all the Matchbox cars, the Hot Wheels. Still have all that stuff. I had the Johnny Lightning set. I mean, all those things.
Yeah.
And
Now
we,
hold on, because you mentioned Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, and this
Mr.
is in the
Rogers
room,
Neighborhood,
so I can grab
WQED
this very
Pittsburgh.
quickly. It's not going to take very long to grab this, but there it
The
is.
trolley.
There's the trolley. This is another thing my grandfather built. My grandfather took up woodwork in retirement and built things for the people in his life that he loved. And this was my Christmas present one year, was he made me a neighborhood trolley. So I've had this for all these years.
How
It survived the
cool
move
is
from West
that,
Virginia to
huh?
Glendale. Yeah,
I tell you, that trolley has traveled, huh?
yes, it has.
To the land of make believe, which is
It is
where it is
durable.
right now. Yeah, it's
But so
cool to
you're
have
talking
these.
about the little neighborhood that they showed in the opening and closing?
They open and
Okay, if you
closing. Chef
this is the other
Brockett's
great
Bakery.
this is the other great thing about the internet is the ability to share knowledge, because what I've now learned, that there are Mr. Rogers fans just as there are game show
Oh,
fans, and
sure.
they've
Yeah.
researched that little toy neighborhood at the opening and they figured stuff out. If you actually want to rebuild that thing with accuracy, what you're going to look for is model train sets manufactured by a company called Plasticville USA, because they didn't build that neighborhood specifically for the show. Those were their model train building kits. And so
Yes.
yes,
And of course, all the greenery is called Lynchen.
yeah.
All the
Eh,
little greenery, the trees, and the whole bit, and the little cars, and just all of it. And I don't know how much you paid attention to the open and the close, but there was a period where um, the house at the end of his street, when they were sort of slowly zooming in to Mr. Rogers' home before we saw him, entering with the sweater and the whole bit. The house, I believe, was at one time it was on the left side, and then one time it was straight on. So if
yeah.
you look at different episodes of the series, the house wasn't necessarily positioned in the same
Can I
exact
ask you to
spot,
vamp, because I have a feeling something that I discussed before we went on the air has just come up. I'll be
involving a
right
ceiling
I'll
fan.
be right back.
Absolutely. Well, the last time, gang, if you saw the episode we did celebrating the iconic game show host Bob Barker, Adam was a guest, and you can still see that episode on our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV. You're watching it right now. This channel, so scroll back, you can see the Bob Barker episode. We had Bob's PR agent. We had Adam with us.
Okay.
Wesley Hyatt was with us, and Wink Martindale was with us, and we got a chance to see that famous chair. Everybody wanted. Do you know how many people
There's
who've been
always something
guests?
going on in my life when I'm on this show.
Well,
I feel like
it's
Bob Hope doing the movie plugs on Tonight Show. I come over
but
here
the
to
thing you are now a Jim Master Show lovity, and that is just by doing what you just did for the second time. Because I can't tell you how many guests, Adam, have been on the show, and since we're doing the show live, they've had to be called away. Sometimes they're called away because they want to get the Oscar and they want to show it on camera, or the dog runs in the room and they want that to end, or the child comes in and tries to rip their headphones off,
yeah.
a bird lands on their head, whatever it is, and we see their chair. So I said, we're going to do a whole episode one day where we just edit together the guests' chairs, and we're going to say, which guest do you remember sitting in that chair?
Yeah.
Because our audience is very astute with it, and they remember the chairs. So everything's good with the ceiling fan and
Everything is good. It's being dealt with. You're going to have a brief cameo here in just a second, but it's going to be dealt with.
very
But yeah,
nice, very nice. It's kind of like that in studios, right? Sets moving and all kinds of stuff happening. I wanted to let you know that we've got some great comments coming in from a lot of different folks, including Shelley, dear friend of our show. She's here. She says, "Hey, fellas," and have Adam tell you why a very special copy of his Alan Ludden book was returned to him.
Oh
Well,
yes,
Adam has his own production crew and everything. We just saw the guy behind you.
yeah. So Shelly is asking about this. Hold on, let
Yes.
me go get it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, this is a very movable, flexible show. If you want to comment live, folks, do so in our JMS Levity Hall chat room. Levity, of course, is light, love, and levity. I said that a little too fast 3.5 years ago. And you know, we're only a few episodes away from 1,000 episodes of the Jim Master Show Live Entertainment Lifestyle Celebrity Talk Show series. Go back and binge watch some of those other episodes. There's almost 1,000 of them with all your celebrity friends and guests, and many more on the way. So there is what we're talking about here that Shelley brought up. And Shelley, good to see you. Hello to Shelley watching. Catch her book too about being an NBC page.
And
We
her
talked
book
about
is
all that.
excellent. I've gotten
Phenomenal book, right?
her book is excellent.
And getting
And
rave reviews.
I've gotten not as far in the book as I would like. Shelly, I'll tell you straight up, your book is part of that. We all have it, the mounting series of books that we're going to get to the next time we're unemployed. So I promise you, effective November 16th, I'm going to sit down and really devote my time to reading My Peacock Tale by Shelley Herman.
I'd love to talk to her because I'd love to put one of these episodes together, kind of like I did with Bob Barker. We did it with Carol Burnett's 90th. We did a tribute to Tina Turner. We did a Cindy Williams tribute, a variety of different ones. And I'd love to get several Shelley and several of the NBC or just pages in general, CBS, NBC, all the different pages. And maybe we can talk about, that whole experience and the shows they've worked on. That would be very, very cool. I don't know about you, but I have been,
but anyway,
ever since Bob Barker passed away, I've
Yeah.
been watching all of the 1970s and 80s episodes on YouTube of The Price is Right.
Yeah.
A lot of people have been doing that.
It's an interesting era. It really is a show that hit its stride years into it. That's why I like the fact that the 24-hour-a-day channel of The Price is Right is in the 1980s, because that's really at the point where, okay, we figured out what does work, we figured out what doesn't work, and everybody is just in a groove, everybody is in their rhythm, and it's just a perfect show from that point forward. But
it was kind of cool to see the early episodes. 72, 73, and how it was, the audience was in the dark a little bit, and just the way the set evolved. Like you said, the set evolved, the addition of additional music cuts when they were showing the washers and dryers got expanded, things of that nature. Just very, very cool to see.
But anyway, the story that I think Shelley wanted to ask about was why this copy was returned to me, but it is a pretty great story. This was when I wrote my book about Alan Ludden. I attempted to get Betty White involved in it and could not get through to her. I did not have the necessary contacts, unfortunately. So I couldn't get through. I couldn't make that connection. So I just wrote the book without her. So she had no involvement with this book at all. This was not an authorized book or of any kind. It was just I wrote a book about Alan Ludden. And then when I finished the book, I did just enough detective work to find what appeared to be a mailing address for Betty White. So I mailed it off to her, and I just explained. I included this little note explaining who I was and what I had done and why I had written this book. And I never heard any response from it. So as far as I knew, it went somewhere, but it didn't wind up in her lap, I thought. And then
You
Betty White
thought.
died, and a few weeks after her death, her personal assistant posts a photo on Facebook, and she says it's the last photo ever taken of Betty. And it's Betty with her personal assistant sitting in the living room, and sitting on the coffee table in front of Betty White is this book. Um, which was more approval than I ever could have asked for.
That's the
That was all I
ultimate,
needed
right?
to see. That was, and you can't really see it on camera, but it's a pretty worn copy. And there are several bookmarks in it, which is the other thing that got my attention. She marked several pages on it, and I couldn't believe it, and I was absolutely floored. Well, it came out that there was an estate sale being planned, and a lot of Betty's private memorabilia was being auctioned off. And I was able, with Shelly's help, to work a connection and get through to her personal assistant. And I said, could you hang on to that book instead of auctioning it off?
Oh yeah.
And so I was able to relay that message. And the next day, this arrived in the mail, and it was Betty's copy of my book. So
How
that is
cool
one of
is
my
that?
all-time trophies now, is that Betty White
Mhm.
read this book and apparently enjoyed it.
Absolutely. For those that aren't familiar with the book, tell us about your take on Alan Ludden.
Alan Ludden was an interesting guy. He was kind of a journeyman prior to this, who
Yes,
dabbled in a few things. He was an English teacher at one point.
that's right.
He was in traditional broadcasting. He was one of those people that did a little bit of everything, announcing commercials and doing the news,
Radio, TV, all of
and
it. Yep.
came up and did a lot of interesting things. He did a radio show called Mind Your Manners for a local station in Connecticut, and it ended up being picked up by the entire NBC network at one point.
That's
But
right.
it was a panel show where they read mail written by teenagers to a panel of teenagers on stage, and it was advice about problems, and the teenagers on stage would give advice about how to make things better, how to fix whatever was going on, telling them what they thought about these problems that were being discussed in the mail. And it had quite an impact. And they discussed things that you would be surprised to hear being discussed by teenagers on a late 1940s radio show. They were discussing peer pressure to have sex on this late 1940s radio show involving kids, and they were discussing drug use. There was a whole thing about an episode about drug use that sort of gathered steam, and it led to some legislation in Connecticut about giving harsher sentences to drug dealers in situations where the customers were underage. And that was a result of Mind Your Manners with Alan Ludden. His radio show caused this legislation to come out.
Quite
So
amazing,
yeah,
right?
a pretty amazing guy. Did a lot before Password ever came along, and then I got to dig in. I was lucky enough that enough was written by both of them and about both of them that I could paint a pretty good picture of their marriage without really getting a chance to talk to either one of them. So I was very happy about that.
Has anybody written a definitive book on Bert Convy?
Not to my knowledge. They're certainly welcome to. I can't write every book on the face of the earth about game shows. So I mean, and I'm serious about that. I would not consider another book by another author to be competition. I can tell you for a fact there's somebody who's working on a biography of another game show host who I haven't touched yet, Jack Barry.
Oh
And I'm
yeah,
hoping that'll be out soon.
Joker.
Yeah, Jack Barry of the
Yeah,
Joker's Wild. So there's somebody working on
yes.
that, and there are a few people who are writing books that are definitive histories of specific shows,
We
including one that I can't talk about it yet because there's not a commitment from a publisher yet. But I'm hoping this manuscript comes out because it sounds really, really good from the
when
details that I know about it so far.
when my college roommate and I graduated from college in New York, we went out to California well, I have a lot of family and friends in California anyway, but we went out to California upon college graduation and we spent the summer in California. His sister was stationed with her husband in San Diego and they were in the military housing. So they said to him, hey, if you guys want to come out to California, you can have the house, you can enjoy, blah, blah, blah. And it was terrific. And then we had a friend who had graduated the year before who lived up in Costa Mesa. He and his fiance at the time, they came down and picked us up and they took us all around. And one of the things that we were able to do, he had always a dream of getting on The Price is Right, but there was like a year wait or something to even get into the building at that time. But the second one was The Joker's Wild. And we went through all the motions to be, he and I, to be the contestants on The Joker's Wild. And we were just about ready to do that. But the only thing that held us back was the commitment to have to stay a lot longer. And both of us were starting brand new jobs. He's a sports writer and editor. So he had his job starting in Boston. I had this job in television starting in New York. So we had to get back to the East Coast. Otherwise, it might have been Joker. It was, but just to see the process too of how they really do like to have contestants who are very excited about the toaster. And, you got to have some sort of a personality. And when I did audition with the Game Show Network situation, the National Search, it was the same kind of thing. One of the very first things they had us do was just come out on the stage and just say your name and tell a little bit about yourself. Because if you couldn't get past that part, how are you going to? So it got down to when we were doing it, and I was, one of the three, they actually had a set and they had contestants. Mark Summers was there, Sony, Synergy Group, and which I think was the marketing arm, and GSN reps were there. They had a full audience, and the buzzers stopped working for the contestants.
Ooh.
They were like, so that was a test to see how it was going to be handled. Are you going to freeze in place? Are you going to be like, humana? You're going to become, Ed, not Ed Norton, but Ralph Cramden. Humana. You're going to become that. It's just frozen in place, nervous.
Yeah.
And I thought it was terrific because for me, I've had so many experiences in broadcast, live, television, radio, where things have gone wrong. Sets have fallen, people have fallen out of chairs, somebody didn't show up. The tape, there was one time they were airing Jaws, and then they realized that they had aired part two instead of part one first.
Ooh.
And then halfway in, the credits started rolling, and then they ran out of what to air, and we were live on TV. And we had to keep vamping for like 45 minutes straight. And then it happened also on PBS. We were doing a PBS pledge drive, and they were showing a mini series. And they realized that upstairs in Master Control, they had run the second half before the first half. They just put the tape in, press play, and didn't realize. And the credits started rolling like an hour before the time that they had allotted. So we were on camera, and I was co-hosting with the program director for the studio at the time. So he was called out of the live studio. We were going back and forth on camera, talking about the virtues of PBS and support this program and everything. And now it was just me standing there. There was nobody else around except the crew. And they're handing me every public television thank you gift away from the camera's eye. All of a sudden, I had the tote bag. And, we also have this available. And then that suddenly went away. We also have the British comedy DVD series available too. And suddenly all these things. And it was about a 45-minute stretch of just... And they were panicking because upstairs you could hear like the mumbling. Oh my God, what happened? We have nothing to air. We can't go back. Just tell him to keep going, keep talking, stretch, just keep going. And it was fantastic. I absolutely loved that, so with the GSN situation, it was the same kind of thing. The buzzers were not working. And I thought it was great. I said, some funny, quick-witted quip that got everybody laughing, and it was a terrific moment. I loved it.
Now let me ask, for the part where you had to talk about yourself for the Game Show Network audition, did they give you any guidelines about what not to say?
No, this was really the very first thing was just get on stage and we want to just feel you out and see who you are. What's your experience? What have you done? Where are you from? And that was really it. It was as basic in the very, very beginning.
Because
and there were people who didn't get through that part.
This was my kryptonite. I actually did have a chance to be a contestant on Wheel of Fortune. I went to one of the Wheelmobile events, and I auditioned and I did well at the Wheelmobile event. And so they called me back for the second leg of the audition, which is come in and play a mock game for the actual contestant coordinators and then give an interview with the contestant coordinators afterwards. And that's the big one where they decide who's going to be on the show. And let me tell you why I absolutely cratered that part of the audition. When I actually got to meet the contestant coordinators face to face, they said, okay, in about 10 minutes, you're going to come inside. We want to get to know you. We're going to talk to you about your interests and your hobbies and what you do. And they said, but please, just one thing. Do not say I'm happy to be here today, because everybody says that and we're tired to hear that. We're tired of hearing that. So whatever you do not walk in here and say I'm happy to be here today. Okay, Jim, whatever you do for the next 10 minutes, don't think about purple elephants, okay? Do not think about purple elephants. I'm telling you right now, don't think about purple elephants for the next 10 minutes.
So I can't think about.
What does that do to your brain? Yeah. So I
I'll
walked
think
in
about.
there,
Yeah, I was going to say.
and what's the first thing out of my mouth? I'm happy to be here today. So yeah, that was the end of my Wheel of Fortune.
Just that one. Well, that's, yeah, like I said,
Yeah.
they're just feeling it all out. And I was watching something recently on with The Price is Right, the lines of people getting in and being selected and all, and how what that process is like and what they look for. They do want people who have some sort of energy, and they get very excited about the dishwasher or the Amana, refrigerator or whatever it is. They're just excited to be there, which is important because it is entertainment, it is television, it is visual. So you do have to have, but every once in a while, it's kind of interesting to see when a contestant would come on contestant row, or they'd be at the showcase and they're showing the showcase items, and you see sort of like, like I don't need the organ, or I don't necessarily need the wicker basket or whatever. Yeah. It's just funny to see some of the facial reactions, and you're like, oh, they really like it? Or when they wish that they hadn't passed the showcase to the other person because the showcase they're getting didn't have the car or the boat or the trip to Paris. Now, tell us about working, like I mentioned, involvement with things like The Price is Right and some of the other game shows. Tell us about what that's like.
Yeah, I started off in the prize department for Wheel of Fortune. I was lucky enough to land a job right away after I moved out to California, working in the prize department. And I have to say, I'm very, very lucky in this regard. Not a lot of people get a second chance. Not a lot of people get a third chance. It took a while to figure out a thing that I was good at, that I could do behind the scenes in game shows. It was not game show prize coordinator. So I did that for half a year at Wheel of Fortune. I did that for half a year at The Price is Right, and was not great at it.
That's incredible. All the prizes that they have.
Yeah.
You're just coming in and out just in one episode, all of the prices and the prizes. It's got to get kind of heady, huh?
And there is a lot to keep track of. Heady is a good word for it, and definitely not chock full of heady goodness. But it's a hectic job, and especially at the time that I got there, especially at The Price is Right, because I worked at The Price is right after they had the change in executive producer. So I was there at a period where everything was changing at that show, and day by day by day, we were getting orders about, well, we want to try this. We want to do this new idea. Here's a thing that we want to do now. Here's something that we don't want to do anymore. So we're going to do this instead. So things were just constantly changing and in flux at the time I was there. I still sucked at it, but that didn't help. So yeah, game show prize department was not my thing. And it took a while to find something else. And while I was trying to figure out how to get in here, that's kind of what led to the books. Game shows are a lot like other things in show business, where you do have to know somebody. And I didn't have that many connections from working in the prize department. I didn't really get to know that many people while I was there, because of the nature of the work and what it did, I didn't get a chance to network or get to know anybody from just outside those doors. So I was adrift for about the next 8 years, working at Madame Tussauds Hollywood, the famous wax attraction. And by night, I was working at the Pantages Theater. I was an usher and I was a stage door guard there. And I just said, I've got to do something to get my name out there. I need to find a way to make people know that I exist. So that's what led to me writing the books. You mentioned you obviously got a copy of my resume there, with encouragement from late night star Conan O'Brien. With encouragement from late night star Conan O'Brien is a very puffed up way of telling the story of what happened, but it works for a biography. I got 15 minutes of fame from being in a segment on Conan O'Brien's TBS show. It was right after he arrived on TBS, and they did a bit where he toured Madame Tussauds Hollywood, and I was the one that got picked by the Madame Tussauds management to be Conan's tour guide in this segment. And so we shot this bit with Conan, and this is what I did to talk about my game show hobby before I ever actually accomplished anything with it. When people would ask me, what are you interested in? I would say game shows. Game shows are my interest. And they would say, what do you mean you're interested in game shows? And I said, well, give me a date. And they give me a date. And I would tell them what game shows aired on that date. And this is another, people think I think it's called eidetic memory or something like that. No, the ability to tell you what game shows aired on a particular date comes from recreational retention, which is you like game shows, so you hang on to everything. Your brain just automatically absorbs everything about the subject that you like. And then being aware of when a game show premiered and when a game show ended, that gives you a range to work with. So you just know if you have a range between this date and this date, then that means this game show aired on that date. So that's the only trick to being able to tell you what game shows aired on a certain date.
Mm-hmm.
But I did that trick for Conan O'Brien, and they aired it, and you can see Conan O'Brien looking quietly horrified as I tell him what game shows aired on the day he was born. But I got my moment out of that, and then Conan, in a piece that didn't air, he began asking me about my game show obsession. So we talked about game shows for a few minutes, and I mentioned I'd like to write a book someday. And this is something that I've said over and over again. I got home that night, and I thought to myself, okay, I have to write a book now, because I want to write a book someday is something that everybody says, and I just said it to somebody who is a famous TV star. I have to write this book now. So that's what got me to actually sit down and commit and research and begin typing and write a book. And one book turned into 2 and turned into 3 and turned into 4 and is now 10. And
had you been a writer before?
Sort of. Right after I graduated from college, I was working the overnight shift at radio stations.
Mm-hmm.
And there's very, very little to do at a radio station. Basically, you're just making sure that the equipment doesn't shut down between between midnight and 6 a.m. Exactly. So I would have a lot of downtime during these 6-hour shifts. And so I wrote a novel that in hindsight isn't that great. So it's never going to see the light of day. But I really just kind of wrote to see if I could write before that. And then this was actually the first thing that I committed to actually writing for the purpose of let's get it out there to the masses.
Very, very cool, huh?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. That's really, and then again, you've been rolling along because there's so many incredible books that you've penned. Dennis James, another.
Oh no, wait, I'm leaning the wrong way.
Yeah. There it is.
Yes.
Tell us about this one. Now, Dennis, of course, might not be for everybody as household a name as some of the other names we're talking about, but he, prolific.
Dennis James is one of those names. It's interesting who slips through the cracks in television history. And I'm not going to say Dennis James was forgotten, but the big distinction is, does your show end up in reruns after it's over? And Game Show Network has come along, and Buzzer has come along, and they've given a lot of new life to a lot of people from the past. And I'm sure we have a generation now that otherwise might not know the names Jack Nars or Tom Kennedy or Gene Rayburn or Bill Cullen, et cetera, et cetera. Mm-hmm. So those folks get a nice afterlife because their work is out there. Yeah, exactly. Dennis James, a lot of his work, a lot of his heyday was in the very, very early days of television. And when I say early days, I mean he was doing experimental broadcasts in the 1930s and the 1940s, onward to the early game shows on daytime TV in the 1950s. And the thing is, nobody was thinking aftermarket for TV shows in that era. So these shows were not getting preserved. A lot of Dennis James's work is just gone. So
just The Price is Right reruns in the evening, right? The night version.
The Price is Right, and even those have not aired for a reason.
You don't really see.
There's speculation about a reason, but I won't speak to it because I don't know this 100%. But Dennis James's Price is Right has not been in rerun. There's another show that he did in the 1960s that could air. It was called PDQ, and to my knowledge, the tapes of that still exist. I found that out a few years ago from a friend of mine who has a steel trap mind about what video archives still exist in different libraries around the city of Los Angeles. But it just works out that a lot of his stuff didn't get reruns. So here's this guy
That's
who
the
was
thing,
a
right?
pioneer of television, who was one of the first people to get out there. And you look at what he did, where he was the first person to do an infomercial, and the first person to call pro wrestling on TV, and the first person to
That's
host
right.
a regularly scheduled network daytime game show. He had a lot of firsts, and it's like, somebody needs to be documenting this guy. This, that old saying, I never got a dinner. This guy needs a dinner. So this was my way of giving him a dinner.
It's so true. A lot of times people are just forgotten about and they're not written about and they're not discussed. But to be able to do it in a way that, pays homage to their contributions to the overall art form, I think is terrific. And it rekindles things for those who do remember, or even remember to, on the fringes as well. And I think, of course, household name, Monty Hall is another.
Yeah. That's
We had his, we
Monty.
had his daughter on the show last year because she was performing, I think at 54 Below, the incredible performer, Joanna Gleason.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Remarkable woman, a great
Some
actress.
people don't
I met her at
realize that. Yeah.
I met her at her father's funeral and just gave my condolences. And
Extraordinary talent. Yeah.
yeah, that one came about as a result, actually, of Monty's funeral, which is kind of a keeper memory for me. Bob Bowden, who's a
Oh,
television
yes.
executive and game show executive of some
Love to
renown.
get him on the show. When you talk to him, say, hey, pop on.
Sure thing. He was a vice president of programming for Game Show Network for a while, and one of the people that helped get that channel off the ground. But Bob invited me to come to Monty's funeral with him, which was a very gracious thing to do. I had no interaction with Monty Hall at all in my life. I had no reason to, if we're being honest, I had no reason to attend his funeral, in the sense of I didn't know the man. We didn't have any kind of connection. But he invited me to the funeral, and a funeral that I'll never forget. I remember sitting in the back row with a lot of people, and I made it a point to sit in the back row because I was like, I was not a friend of his. I don't deserve one of the closer seats to this one, so I'm going to sit in the back. And I just remember at the end of the funeral, everybody in my row stands up, and I'm a Catholic boy from West Virginia. It's a Jewish funeral. I have no idea what the ceremonies are. I have no idea what the rituals are, but I see everybody in my row stand up. So I'm like, oh, we're doing a thing. So I stand up too. And everybody in the back row begins making their way to other people attending the funeral and wheeling them out. And I realize I was the only person in the back row at Monty Hall's funeral who was not there as a hired nurse for somebody else in attendance. So Monty Hall had a lot of friends who lived a very, very long time. But
So now we know why they got up.
Yeah. We lined up at the cemetery to pay our final respects, and
Must have been hundreds and hundreds of people.
Hundreds and hundreds of people.
Yeah.
And Bob explained a tradition of Jewish funerals, which I didn't know about, and it was a very powerful moment. But they have the dirt out there with a couple of shovels, and you are encouraged to bury the body.
Yes, I've seen
it's
everybody
like
grabs a shovel, takes some dirt, and puts it on
so I helped bury Monty Hall, which was just an amazing feeling to experience something like that. And it made me think about what my life was, where I've been.
It's an interesting, it was a colleague of somebody I worked with at iHeartRadio, and she was one of the phone operators for one of these shows that I did. And her son had passed suddenly, and she was of the Jewish faith. And we went, and it was the very first Jewish funeral I had been to as well. And it was the same setup. And it was the first experience of seeing, the open area where the casket, slowly lowers in, and then everybody takes a shovel, and it's a beautiful thing. Yeah. We never experienced that before. I would just remember you wouldn't even really sometimes even see, our relatives would be like, "Oh, we can't see it get lowered." What? No.
Yeah.
But and any of that. But it's a beautiful thing, and
and
what an experience to do that for Monty Hall, huh?
And I also have to say, because I'm sure Monty would be delighted by this, the conversation that was happening behind me while we were lined up. There were two older women behind me. And the conversation that I hear as we're preparing to bury Monty Hall is I hear one of them say, "I was on the show in 1969. What about you? 1971. Yeah, right. Oh, did you win anything?" And the other one says, "I won $150. I would have won more, but I only had 3 dimes in my purse that day."
It's just, isn't that something?
Yeah.
It's not. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And of course, Match Game, bum,
Hmm.
bum, ba-dum, bum, ba-dum, bum, Gene Rayburn, and oh boy, Brett
Yeah. Oh,
Summers,
huge.
Charles Nelson Riley, and the whole, and you have it there too, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, show it.
Yes.
It's
There
always
it
good
is
to
right
have
there.
the author hold his.
There you
So
go.
tell us the inspiration for celebrating this.
Inspiration for that one, Match Game was always just a favorite of mine. It was one of
Yeah.
the shows that I discovered when I first got Game Show Network. Match Game was the first example of a show that I didn't know existed and then got hooked on when I finally got a chance to see it.
CBS Afternoons, Match
Hmm.
Game, followed by Tattletales.
Yeah. So I was a devout viewer of Match Game reruns on Game Show Network for the longest time. And then after I finished writing my biography of Bill Cullen, Fred Westbrook, who was another great name in the world of game shows. He was the agent or the estate executor for every noteworthy game show host of the past that you could name. And he started out as a devoted fan the same way that I started out, and eventually became the agent for all of his childhood heroes, which, what a way to make a living.
How cool is
But
that?
Fred, after I turned in my Bill Cullen manuscript, just pulls out this box of newspaper clippings and photos of Gene Rayburn, and Fred just very quietly asked me, "Do you think you have another book in you?" And so I
Mm,
said, I'm up to the challenge."
yeah,
So that's
yeah.
where the book about Gene Rayburn came from.
He
And
ended his
I
life
want to
in
thank,
Massachusetts, right? Not ended his life, but he passed
yeah,
away at his home in
hmm,
Massachusetts. Because I remember after Match Game had ended and other things that he was working with, the reincarnation of Match Game when they did it. Um, there was the Match Game Hollywood Squares hour too that they did as well. I remember that. He was then doing a show on what was WNEW Channel 5 in New York City, which is now WNYW. And it was
Saturday
sort of
Morning
like a
Live.
Saturday morning, yeah,
Yeah,
talk show, gardening tips, cooking segments, different things. And Gene was the guy doing it. And it was one
yeah,
of
it
the
was
last times I saw him, on television with something that was a past or post Match Game.
it was a show that they were trying to sell for national syndication, and they couldn't get enough stations to sign on. So that one year in on WNEW was the only year that they did. But it was a show called Saturday Morning Live that
That's
Gene
it.
was pretty proud of when he talked about it in his later years, because it was something different that wasn't a game show that allowed himself to,
He was good at it. He was
yeah,
very smooth and funny
hmm,
and witty and relaxed. He
yeah,
had a very relaxed persona with that episode, with that series. I thought it was terrific. Yeah.
yeah,
I don't recall how many years it was on, but it
just the
was
1 year, yeah,
it was just the 1 year.
hmm,
Yeah.
short run.
That's it was a
But
short
yeah, the
run.
matchless
Yeah.
Gene Rayburn came out, and this is one of the most beautiful
Bill
pieces of
Cullen.
timing that I've ever experienced in my life. Was that book about Gene Rayburn came out, and pretty
Yeah.
much immediately ABC announces that they're rebooting the Match Game. And
Yes.
what was amazing was looking at the sales figures on Amazon, because the pattern was consistent from the very beginning to the very end of that ABC revival. I sold copies of that book every time an episode aired on ABC, and I
That's
loved that.
exactly
So
that's what
yes,
happens. Yeah, because people
yes,
start, what did they say? I mean, record sales for Michael Jackson exceeded when he passed what they
yeah.
were when he was alive. It's just this, inquisitive nature. Everybody, like I said, they're watching whatever they can get on YouTube of The Price is Right and anything with Bob Barker and all the whole thing. It's just Truth of Consequences, just because it's in the news and people want to remember or they want to learn or they want to do a little research, whatever it may be. You mentioned Bill Cullen, of course, another,
Yep.
and the original host of the first version of The Price is Right, of course,
Now this
among
one,
many other shows.
I'm here trying to sell books. I will give a caveat to any potential customers who are watching this.
Wait a
There
minute,
is a,
you're only here to sell books? I thought you were here for the Jim Master Show Levity.
I hope everybody sees fit to buy books after they're finished watching this, but I'll let
Oh,
you know
this crowd does.
there's a revised version of that book on the way. Here's the thing about Bill. Bill left behind such an involved resume and such a busy list of credits. In the 10 years since I wrote that book, I've learned enough to justify another book. I about 6 months ago dug out the original manuscript that I submitted to the publisher and managed to add about 85 pages worth of new info to it, just based on things that I've learned ever since that book was originally published. And I've also gotten to know his family a little better. His nephew David Nars, who's kind of been tasked with being the family historian and had a lot of photos and had a lot more info to offer. And I got in touch with a few other people. I just talked on the phone yesterday with June Ferguson, who was one of the models from the original Price is Right. Two of the models, Tony Wallace and June Ferguson, the two models that worked with Bill the most on the original Price is Right, are both happily still with us.
That's
And
right.
so I was on the phone with June on Sunday for a wonderful conversation. So some of her memories are going to be in the book. Bob Hilton, who was his announcer on Blockbusters, gave some memories for the book. So there's a lot more stuff to go into about the life of Bill Cullen. So there's a new version of that book on the way with new information and a bunch of new photos. So by all means, buy whatever books you like. And I'm not going to stop you from buying the book about Bill Cullen, but just be advised there is another version of that book on the way.
There's a revived, revamped, refreshed, rebooted version
Yes.
coming up, which is exciting. Here's another.
Yep.
This Day in Game Show History. Tell us about this.
The 4-volume set, which was not what I was planning, but when I finished the manuscript, 365 essays is a lot more than it sounds like. And even then, 365 essays sounds like a lot, but it ended up being about 2,000 pages by the time it was all done and all the photos were picked out. So the publisher sent me the first book cover for volume 1, and I did a double take and I said, whoa, volume 1. So my first book turned into 4 books, which is I was fine with, because that was a great way to artificially inflate my resume. And now, instead of being the author of a book, I can go around and say, well, I'm the author of 4 books. And that's a tradition that I've continued to this day. Yeah, these are the 4 volumes of the series, and it's 365 commemorations and celebrations of noteworthy events in game show history, one for every day of the year, except for Leap Day, because nothing ever happens on Leap Day. And that came about because, are you familiar with a series of books called Uncle John's Bathroom Reader?
Yes,
Okay.
Tell our audience about that. Yes.
Okay, Uncle John's Bathroom Reader is a book designed to be read in the bathroom.
Yes.
It's a series of essays that about trivia, about just all kinds of things in pop culture and history.
Keep you occupied.
Yes. Yeah, and each one is a short read. So I wanted to write something like that. So I wrote this book with the intention of being a book that you could take into the bathroom and read about the history of game shows. And got great response to that. And then I was off and running as an author after that.
So just kept going with it, right? Yep. Which is incredible. And of course, Wink Martindale, who was on our show a couple of times and was on when you joined us as well for the Bob Barker tribute. Another incredible, talented, funny, witty guy who's just Mr. Broadcasting, you know, with a great voice and the smile and the hair and the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And I've been fortunate to cross paths with him a few times since. And the Wink on TV really is, he gives off that vibe in real life. He really has that energy, and it's amazing to see him. Even in old age, he still has that energy and that spark, as you saw a few weeks ago when he was on your show.
Right.
You know, Wink Martindale is still Wink Martindale after all these years.
Absolutely, because he's still doing that radio series as well, which is really, really cool. And you know, God bless him with that. Now you have something else that's coming. I sort of teased it a little bit. Gong This Book. And this is really cool. Chuck Barris, of course, The Gong Show, JP Morgan, and all the rest. Tell us about the inspiration for this. And this will be coming out hopefully towards the holidays, folks. So we'll keep you posted on that. And you can, you know, go online.
Well, the inspiration for this. So here's the story there. I was initially I was initially cold called by another publisher. This is Bear Manor Media that's going to be publishing this one. I was contacted by another publisher and asked, can you write a book about the history of the Gong Show? And so I agreed. So I was doing the work initially for another publisher. And this other publisher was so uncooperative and so opposite of helpful. I'll give you an example of this. I wanted to have photos in the book.
Yeah,
it's the history of the Gong Show, and I mean,
television.
A lot of the flavor of the Gong Show is what that show looked like.
All the wacky guests, and
you want to have photos in that book. And so I said, okay, so what do you want me to do about photos? I mean, am I going to go to Getty Images and get photos, or? And they said, oh, you know, we're concerned about ownership issues, and okay. They said if you can figure it out, go right ahead. So I made contact. again, through Shelley Herman, God bless her. Shelley has been just a savior to me a few times. Shelley put me in touch with Vince Longo, who was Chuck Barris's staff photographer. Chuck retained a photographer for years and years and years, and his job was to just take photos nonstop during all the tapings of every show that Chuck Barris did. Um, and so I made contact with Vince Longo, and Vince saved everything he had. And I had press kits from Bob Bowden and from
Mhm.
another collector named Robert Burrows. And the thing about press kits, for anyone who's considering writing a book, photos that come with a press kit come with the presumption that they are going to be published somewhere, because that's the reason that they were sent along. That's the reason these photos were made. The idea is they're going to be published as part of promotions for the book. So you're free and clear to use a photo that came as part of a press kit. So I had the photos from the press kits, and I had photos from Vince Longo, Chuck's staff photographer. And the publisher says, well, I don't know if it's owned by Sony now, because Sony owns Chuck Barris Productions. We don't want to step on their toes. And I said, okay, if we can get permission from Sony to publish these photos, will you go ahead and let me use these photos? And they said, okay, well, if we get permission from Sony. And I said, great, have your lawyers contact them and see what they say. Well, no, you have to do that. We're not going to contact Sony. So Adam had to contact Sony's legal department. I, the author, reached out to Sony's legal department, and I said, here's the book that I want to
Yeah.
publish.
Welcome to the
Can
new
you
world,
figure
right?
out what the legal entanglements might be if I want to use photos from the Gong Show? And I hear back from Sony's legal department, and Sony's legal department gets back in touch with me and says, honestly, we don't have anything here that says we have a claim to the photos. So you're free and clear with whatever you want to do with Gong Show photos. So I forward this email from the Sony legal department to the publisher that I was supposed to publish this book for. And I say, hey, good news. We're in the clear. We can publish whatever photos we want from the Gong Show. And the publisher says, well, it's best that we not take any chances on this. So we're only going to use 10 photos in the book. And I kind of emailed back a double bird to them and said, I'm done. And I went back to the nice folks over at Bear Manor Media, and I said, hey, this is your book now. Enjoy it. So that was the whole process that caused this thing to drag on for a long time. But finally, I'm happy to say that the index is being typed up for this book as we speak. This book should be out by Christmas. That we're done. So
Make a nice stocking stuffer, folks, right?
yes. Oh,
That
yeah.
is cool.
If
So
you have oddly shaped feet.
if you have so maybe you can tease a little bit if other things have been written or focused on with the Gong Show over the years and Chuck Barris. How is this take different? What is it going to be about without
This
giving
take
it
is a
away,
little
of
bit
course?
this take is a little bit different because it has the perspective of the passage of time. The last book that was really written about the Gong Show was written about a year into the show's run,
Right.
when the show was a national craze, and
Yeah.
a very quick cash-in book was written to capitalize on that. That sounds a little cynical, and I certainly used it for research, but it was, it was a thing to take advantage of the fact that it was a big hit show right now, and it was fresh and new. And
Right.
so now we have 40 years worth of time to look back on and see what was this show's legacy, how did it affect the television landscape, who was the guy that created it, what was Chuck Barris ultimately, who was he ultimately, and it gave his employees a chance for perspective. I got a chance to talk to a lot of Chuck's employees for a sense of their perspective and what the Gong Show meant to their lives. And it's very, very touching what his employees thought of him. And everybody that I talked to who worked with Chuck absolutely loved him. Put him on the pedestal and pretty much universally said the best boss we ever had. Chuck paid well. Chuck elevated women in his company and valued women in his company at a time in history where that was only just starting to become something that people needed to be mindful about. Chuck was on top of that, and just an extraordinary person with a sense of what people were interested in on television, what would draw eyes to the audience, and he just made it work. And the other thing that a few people who were contestants on the shows, this was the other fun part of this job, was doing detective work on past contestants of the show and tracking them down and asking them for interviews. And my phone would ring, and I would hear the most bewildered voices saying, "Is this Adam who emailed me?" Because these people could not believe they were being emailed about something that they had done 45 years ago. And yes, that's me. I'd like to talk to you for a few minutes. And so I would talk to these contestants. And the point that several of them made was this was a show that was on the air in the era of no social media, no cable TV, no real cable access. It- You had three options for entertainment when you were sitting at home. And that three channels worth of options did not welcome new talent. That was not a space for giving somebody a chance or giving somebody a shot. Television was for people who had established themselves a little bit. I mean, even the young unknown comic on the Tonight Show had paid their dues doing touring comedy on in nightclubs across the country. And the thing about the Gong Show was Chuck would put anybody on, and I don't say that in the negative way. Oh, they'll put anybody on the show. No, Chuck would put anybody on the Gong Show. It was a chance for everybody to get, as Chuck would say, their shot at the big time. It was a chance for new talent to get out there and say, I exist. I'm available for work. I can do this at your local nightclub or at your next variety show. And he's got to be celebrated for that. He did launch some careers. Paul Rubens credits the Gong Show with helping his career take off, not just because he was on the show, but there was another element to that. Paul Rubens was a contestant on the Gong Show 14 times. And the reason he was a contestant on the show 14 times, there are a lot of game shows that say you're only allowed to be on the show once, and that's it. The policy at the Gong Show was you could be on the Gong Show as many times as you could, as long as you did something completely different every time you auditioned for the show. You if you were a singer, you couldn't sing a song every time you auditioned for the show. It had to be a new thing every time you auditioned. So Paul Rubens, being very, very imaginative, managed to come up with 14 unique things that he could do on the Gong Show. So he was a contestant on the Gong Show 14 times. And what Chuck Barris did for his contestants, which is amazing and unheard of for the game show business, was in a lot of cases he signed up his contestants to receive residuals, or he would get them registered in the Actors Guild or the Writers Guild, whatever was relevant. So they would be entitled to royalties if and when he sold the show in reruns. Well, about 2 years after NBC canceled the Gong Show, Chuck began selling the Gong Show into syndication. And Paul Rubens told the story. He was looking for a day job because he just was not getting the bills paid and it wasn't working out. And he got this windfall check for about $7,000 or $8,000 in the mail one day, and it was from residuals from Chuck selling the Gong Show reruns in syndication. And that $7,000, $8,000 was the result of uh, Paul being on the show so many times. So Paul had this massive windfall that he could live off of for a while, and he called off his search for a day job. And while he was living off his Gong Show residual money, that was when he was creating Pee Wee Herman. And so that was how he
That's
got Pee
right.
Wee Herman off the ground. It was work that he was doing while he was living off Gong Show money.
That's incredible, huh?
Yeah.
Gong show money.
Yep.
So, everybody has their favorites, and Tattletales isn't talked about as much as, some of the others that stayed on longer or just were in reruns. Of course, you can see some of it now on the nostalgic channels or on YouTube or whatever. But what do you think about Tattletales? What a unique concept that was, huh?
Tattletales was a neat I couldn't say
Wow,
unique because it
wow,
was
wow,
the newlywed
wow,
game
wow, wow.
with celebrities. But I loved what they did with the prize money for that show, which was such a charming,
Banana
crazy thing.
section and
Yeah, for anyone who's not familiar, Tattletales, the game of celebrity gossip, they would play essentially the newlywed game with three celebrity couples, and the studio audience was divided into three sections. And the celebrity
mm,
couples won money for every time that they matched answers on these personal questions they were being asked. And the money from the correct answers was being divided among their designated section of the studio audience. Goodson, Todman, and CBS installed a check cutting machine in the back of the studio, and you would get your check on the way out of the building. And I think it's Mark Evanier has told the story about how Tattletales audiences would be packed with homeless people on the day of the tapings because they tape 5 episodes in a day, like all game shows. So you could make a pretty good chunk of money just sitting in the audience of Tattletales, and it was enough to live off of for a week. It was enough to cover your groceries for a
what
week.
would they do? Move the
Yeah,
people around so they weren't always in the same shots?
they may have. I know Let's
Yeah.
Make a Deal did that with taping, so it wouldn't surprise me if any other game show did that. But yeah, so the homeless folks, that Tattletales was their food money for the several years that it was on the air. Um, But yeah, interesting show. Interesting to hear the anecdotes that the celebrities would share, and
Yeah.
it's fun to watch the veneer come down and see your favorite celebrities arguing with their spouses just like you do.
Yeah.
Look, celebrities, they're human.
Well, and when they would have, I used to love. They don't really do it now, but they had where they would interchange hosts with different shows and things of
Yeah,
that nature. Like there was even with Tattletales, the game show hosts week where they were interchanging who was hosting, or you'd
and I
see
love
them
that.
on
Yeah,
Match Game. You would see Bob Barker and some. It was just a way that they were bringing them all together as like a family sort of
yeah.
feeling. Yeah,
Oh yeah.
very
And
different.
that is one of the fun things about celebrity shows is when you do establish a certain rapport with stars, and so you get to see them over and over again, and you do develop kind of a family feel about these people.
Exactly right.
And
That's
that's
what it
one of the
is.
great things about game shows that use celebrities is when you find the right celebrities
Yeah.
and they, they
That
sort of
is
they
one
mesh
of
with the
the
show.
continued lasting one of the things I always have loved about television and radio as well is that connection that you have with the folks, or that you feel you have with the folks that you've seen for many years come into your living rooms, whether it's through game shows, talk shows, news programs, sports, public news. Look at all the folks over the year, the Julia Childs and everybody that people have grown to have this affinity for, the Mr. Rogers,
Mhm.
Sesame Street, where these things become part of Americana. They become a part of our lives. And when somebody passes away, or when something ends, or people really feel it, they deeply feel like they've lost a family member, they've lost a friend, they've lost a way of life, or something along those lines, which is a beautiful thing about the power of television and radio
And
when
I
used in a good way.
I especially think it's different when it's somebody who's famous for being themselves on television. Now, you can hear the stories
Themselves.
about, oh, I hear they're very different, but what I mean
Yeah,
is,
there are
it's
many.
different when it's, a
Yeah.
famous person who's an actor, where what you're associating with them is the character. Um, it's different when it's a person who is out there under their real name and presenting themselves, and the show is them just making the best use of who they are and using it
Yes.
to elevate the show that
It
they're on.
fits them
Yeah,
perfectly. Exactly.
and
Allows them to express it perfectly.
and
Yeah.
so that's why I think it's different. And I think that's why it does hit fans hard when it's somebody like a Mr. Rogers or a Bob Barker,
Or
when it's
Regis
somebody that you do
Philbin.
feel
Yeah.
like you know them because they didn't have that actor veneer about them, for lack of a better word.
Well, one of the things too that has changed a lot too within the realm of the industry is, in the earlier years, the people that you had were trained broadcast people,
Hmm.
starting in radio, and then they got their break in television, and then they went from there, and they were trained as broadcast professional hosts. They
Yeah.
didn't necessarily come from, they weren't always like a vocalist or an athlete or anything before. They were trained, coiffed, polished, smooth broadcast hosts. And you don't see that as much now. You see more people who maybe they won a singing competition contest, or maybe they were, an athlete on a football field, or whatever it is, now hosting these types of shows, when it used to be the people who were the broadcast people who grew up since they were four,
Yeah.
hoping to be able to do that, not necessarily doing that as much. That's a big, big shift that's occurred.
It is a big shift, and it's part of the change of television is you don't need to treat game shows like a live broadcast. It was very different in the era where game shows were just cranked out one after another in a day, and editing was so expensive that you didn't want to do it if you didn't have to. So the best way to handle that was to treat it like it was a live broadcast. So you had to have hosts who were flawless, hosts who could get through it, hosts who could go out there with very, very little instruction and kind of be the term that I've heard a lot is on-camera producer. Have a host who is invested in the game enough that they can make their own decisions if something goes wrong during the game. Somebody who can be trusted to do that. Um, and that's not to I don't say that as a knock or as a complaint about the talent now, but what has changed is that you don't need those because now we do have the luxury of time with game shows. So it's opened up the roster a little bit, and it's altered the way that some shows are produced.
Do you like
So that
that?
era of the wheel of game shows, that's another term that I've heard over the years, is that back in the good old days when they were hiring for a new game show and they had a new game show going into production, they just referred to the wheel of names for game show hosts, and it was just going over the wheel and deciding,
Yes.
okay, who's
Yeah.
available right now?
Is it
This
John
guy's hosting a show. This
Kennedy
guy's
or
hosting. Yeah.
right?
Okay, this guy's not hosting a show. He's our host. Call him.
Chuck Woolery, whoever.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right.
So that's what's changed, is just the fact that we don't need these hosts for the reason that we needed them in the past. And so that's led to getting hosts who are a marquee name, somebody who has a following that would go, oh, this person's hosting a game show. And you try to draw an audience that way.
Do you like that, or do you prefer
I mean,
the other way that it was done?
I don't want to say I don't like it, because obviously the current way is also working because people are watching game shows. I did like the era of the same guys hosting shows over and over again, because it is fun to see this person hosting another show. Like, it's fun to watch Bill Cullen hosting 3 on a Match, and then see him hosting Winning Streak, and then see him hosting Blankety Blanks.
And that polished, coiffed style, the smooth.
Yeah, it's nice to see them in the same environment over and over again, and it's nice to be familiar and comfortable with them.
Right.
But on the other hand, I can't knock, having Alec Baldwin host Match Game or Michael Strahan host $100,000 Pyramid or anything like that. Because it's certainly not a strike against them that it's the only game show they're hosting. Like I said, it's fun to see one face hosting different shows over and over again, and to go back on old shows and see, oh, it's this person, this person, this person. Yeah, I'm fine with the modern way of doing things. I don't have an objection to that. It is fun to see familiar faces, but I'm okay with it.
Exactly. Yeah, and the styles are different too. Like you said, some of the other originals were more, maybe they come out, they were smooth and suave and polished, and everything was sort of perfect in a way. Maybe not as loose in some ways, depending on the show.
Right.
But yeah, it's just expanded in so many different ways and so many different forms. Of course, the music, the theme music, is something that you can always tell which show is which just from the theme, and you'd be sort of bopping to the theme. I think the theme music and the music underneath, when showing items or whatever it is, contestants writing down their answers, was as important as sometimes everything else that was going on, the underscoring of the music.
Oh yeah. Yeah, no, all that atmosphere is very, very important. It's what gives the show its identity. And one of the things that I've learned from the National Archives of Game Show History is how much went into establishing that atmosphere. One of the things that I appreciated from talking to Ed Kalehoff, a name that you mentioned earlier, was finding out that when Ed Kalehoff got hired to compose the music for a game show, he would ask for the set design, he would ask for blueprints, and he would ask for the preliminary artwork. And what he said was, I want the show to sound like what it looks like.
Yes.
And so just the appreciation for that, the effort to make sure that sound matches look. I loved that detail, and I loved learning that. It seems like such an obvious thing now that I've heard him say that, but it wouldn't have occurred to me before that he would do that.
When you watch some of the shows where his work's involved, and he was so great with doing television promos, and he's done everything, newscast themes, all of it. An epic producer, arranger, the whole bit. When you look at it all, it's really, it's an extraordinary thing, and game shows have just been such a part of our lives in such a unique way. What do you see as the future? Do you see more of them coming? Is there like a slight resurgence? I know you said that there's something that you're working on that's going to be coming out with Game Show Network, which is exciting.
Yeah, there's a new series coming up with Game Show Network. I can't go into too much detail about it at the moment, but hold on just a moment. Empty chair coming.
There's the chair, folks. I won't say anything. You just see the chair. And welcome back. That was a quick break. Great conversation, folks. If you're enjoying this episode, give us a like. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Jim Masters TV, where there's almost 1,000 episodes you can binge watch, and leave a comment for us as well. Yeah.
Anyway, thank you for allowing me to stall the time while I think about my answer to that question.
Is the ceiling fan in and spinning now, I hope? Or?
No, there's no ceiling fan in there at all. So
he's having a ceiling fan sort of taken care of, folks.
Yeah.
It's just like being in a studio where a set's being built.
It's just the timing of this, where the only window of time they had available was 4 p.m. when I'm going to start giving an interview.
4 on
Um,
the West Coast there, yeah.
yeah.
So you're
But
talking about,
anyway, the future of game shows, I think there are going to be a lot more reboots, and the reason that I think there are going to be a lot more reboots is because that's the safer thing to do in television production. Is rather than rolling the dice on spending several $1 million on a series of run-throughs and test games and pilots and focus groups, it's a lot easier to point to a show from the past and say, okay, this is a show that ran for about 4 years, got this kind of audience. Um, I think I think we're going to see a lot of reboots. The other thing I think we're going to be seeing a lot of for funsies games in the future. And we're already kind of seeing that with podcasts. I'm involved with a podcast called Go Fact Yourself, and it's a game show podcast. It's played for no prize. It's just strictly a for fun game. And I think as we go into these new alternative forms of media, like Twitch and like podcasting, I think you're going to see a lot more game show formats where it really is just a bunch of people getting together and playing a game for fun. I think that's a big part of our future here. I think the glitz and glamour and the traditional game show will always be a part of that, but I think it's going to go in a few different directions here in the next few years.
tell us about this. We dug this up.
Yeah. That
Cool,
is the
huh?
National Archives of Game Show History. I've mentioned the oral histories a few times without really going into the details of what that is. The Strong Museum of Play is the home of the National Archives of Game Show History. It's a wonderful archive in Rochester, New York. It's a museum dedicated to the history of play in all its forms. So
I think his I think his I think he took himself off the air. Talk about live, right? His either his battery died out because I'm looking down. We can usually see the guest down in the little box there. Either the dog that was barking came in and maybe disconnected a cable. Talk about live events and with sometimes things can happen. That's one of the cool things about doing things live. Anything can happen, and it's how you handle it that makes a difference. So in this case, it's not that the buzzers aren't working, but something that happened to me on a radio show, that I've been doing for many, many years. Just last week, where the guest was on the air and we were having a conversation on the radio series, and boom, they disappeared. We had to call them back as we were chatting. Did you have to put another quarter in the phone?
I,
I
I'm
said
the
the
worst
dog
guest you've
ran
ever had
in.
because
No,
I'll tell you exactly what happened because I did
your
a dumb
battery died.
thing. No. You asked me to explain the oral histories, and I said I'd better make sure I have the URLs right when I pull up the
Oh, and
when I tell them where to find these oral histories. So I decided to pull up the website for the Strong Museum. What I didn't do was open a new tab to pull up that website. So yeah, that's what I did. I went
so
ahead and I clicked myself out of here so I could
out
find
of
the
this
website.
tab for
Yeah,
the other tab, right? Exactly.
yeah.
What is
Um,
the website address?
museumofplay.org. There you go. It's museumofplay.org. That is the website for the entire Strong National Museum of Play.
And what is
Um,
this the museum for folks that are
yeah,
now tickled by what we're talking about?
It's an archive of all things devoted to play and all definitions of that word. So there's an exhibit based on the history of dollhouses. There's an exhibit about board games. There's an exhibit
Oh,
about model trains. One of the really neat things for very, very young children who come there is if you played store when you were a kid, they
yeah.
actually set up a child-sized supermarket. Everything is on a shelf that a child could reach. It's small scaled down versions of everything, but it is a tiny functioning supermarket.
Wow.
So kids can come in and play store in there. Um, and a few years ago, they got the idea from Howard Blumenthal, who is one of the co-founders now of the National Archives of Game Show History. Howard's father, Norm, was the producer of Concentration on NBC for 14 years. And Howard himself was involved in the development of MTV's Remote Control and PBS's Where in the World is Carmen Sandiego.
That's right.
But Howard roped in Bob Bowden, who we mentioned a little bit earlier on,
Mm-hmm.
and we established this thing called the National Archives of Game Show History. And what we are right now, we're pretty much just an online presence. There's a game show exhibit right now. We've got James Holzhauer's trophy from the Jeopardy Masters tournament a few years ago on display at the museum. But we're hoping in the next few years to establish a dedicated wing where we can store everything that the Strong Museum has in storage right now related to game shows. And we're talking right now what we have in storage. We have the set of Family Feud. We have the contestant podiums, and we have the Fast Money game board from the original Family Feud sitting in the archives. We've got some of the Price is Right pricing games that have been decommissioned over the years sitting in the back space. We have set pieces from The Weakest Link. We have set pieces from Trato Hecho, the Spanish version of the Spanish language version of Let's Make a Deal.
Because do you think if these things were not preserved, they would just be tossed out like everything
absolutely,
else?
yeah. I mean, a lot of what's been preserved so far was the result of making sure that things didn't end up in a dumpster, because they would otherwise. Yeah, this stuff would all disappear otherwise, because game show sets are sort of made to be thrown away.
Right. Even the episodes too, kind of like news programs, or even originally the Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, were not really meant for reruns per se, like the I Love Lucy's and other things.
Right.
These were 5 days a week situations, and they would just bang them out, like you said, and not necessarily, thank God, some of them have been saved. Good thing with Johnny Carson that he decided to make sure that NBC was saving, or he was having saved.
I mean, I mean that's the thing. He and even then, not totally successful, because the first 10 years of the Tonight Show were gone.
Right.
Yeah. And this work does not get appreciated the way that it does. I'm not saying that everyone was a masterpiece. I'm not saying that every one of them is a treasure that needs to be hung up onto. But just the fact that this stuff disappeared en masse is amazing to me. And
so with the National Archive of Game Show History at the Strong Museum of Play, are you always researching and digging and looking for these gems? I would imagine,
sort of. I mean, we're always keeping an eye open for auctions and estate sales and things like that. But also, it's just a matter of us contacting people that we know, and contacting people who know other people, and trying to gather things that way. And there is a lot of research involved, particularly in the Oral Histories project, which I mentioned a few times and didn't go into detail about it. But our biggest achievement of what we have so far at the museum is online on museumofplay.org. You'll find the National Archives of Game Show History Oral History series, which is we sit down with people from all realms of game show production. It's not just the hosts or the announcers. We're talking to network executives who buy the shows. We're talking to the agents who represent the producers and the hosts. We're talking to set designers. We're talking to directors, everybody who is involved in the production of a game show. And we're getting their stories, and we're preserving their memories of the work that they did for the different shows that they were involved with. And it's extraordinary to sit down with these people, sometimes for 5 and 6 hours at a time, and just be able to pick their brains about everything that they did. And that's been a real honor and a real privilege.
And they probably really enjoy it too, that it's fondly remembered, and that there's an interest in how these things were done, how it was put together, what was it like working on it, whether it's on camera or behind the scenes. I'm sure they appreciate the interests as well, and sort of re-sparking the interest.
One of the more touching ones, I won't name a name because I'm talking about a private conversation here, but we were setting up the equipment in
there's nobody listening, it's just us.
We were setting up the equipment in one interviewee's home, and he said this with such an excited tone in his voice. He says, "So people are going to be able to watch this on the internet, right?" And I said, "Yeah." And he says, "And people are going to be able to watch it after I'm gone?" And I said, "Yeah." And you could just see how happy that made him. Just the idea that he was leaving something behind by giving this interview.
Legacy, right? Legacy, which it really is, in so many levels and so many, ways, shapes, and forms, which is incredible. How did you get connected with, the museum and all that? How'd that happen for you, Adam?
I was lucky enough to get the lasso thrown around me by another name that we mentioned before in this interview, Bob Bowden, the co-founder of the exhibit. I worked as a question researcher on one of his shows, and Bob and I have had a chance to get to know each other pretty well, and Bob saw something in me that he liked, so he got me involved as an archivist and a researcher. So I write columns for the Strong Museum newsletter about game shows once a month, and I'm also involved in the research and the preparation of these questions that we do for the Oral History series.
That's so cool. It really, really is. And people might not even realize that there is this strong national museum of play about all these aspects of play. I think it's really super cool, and it's up in Rochester, New York. And there's again the website, folks. Definitely check it out. You could probably donate to help them out as well. I'm sure they love donations to help them, continue to expand the archives and everything else. I also just wanted to throw in too that you've done, we picked just one quick one, but just to slip it in, you've also done books involving the WWF as well, huh?
Yeah.
Yeah.
As kind of a hobby, this is something that I do. I can't even call it a side hustle. I don't make anywhere near enough money to call it a side hustle. But as a way to take my mind off how much I hated being a telemarketer 15 years ago when I was a telemarketer, I began writing reviews of old wrestling shows.
Was that you that called about that aluminum siding you were trying
Yeah.
to sell?
Oh, mine was worse. Mine was investments in Canadian oil fields. And it was just they were unproven fields. So it was the worst thing to try to sell on the phone. But yeah, I there was this call on a website asking for writers, and it's completely unpaid. It really is. It's for exposure, and that's
Yeah.
all I did for. That's all I have anything to do with for wrestling. But it's just something to do for fun and something to
And
do.
there's a series of these
Just
different
yeah,
years,
and
87,
this is just me
86. And
piling stuff that I've already written and published on this website, and so that's why those are dirt cheap. They're 99-cent Kindle books. But yeah, by all means, if you like game shows and wrestling, you can just kind of go through everything on Amazon and complete your Adam Nedeff collection.
in your, real quick, I'm sure that having the opportunity to celebrate the shows and celebrate the hosts who, made these shows happen as well, that it's given you an appreciation for the individuals, not just the public persona, not just the person that's on set, on stage, what have you, but the individual, their life, the things that they've dealt with, the thing where they've come from, what their hopes, dreams, desires were. And you've had an opportunity to, celebrate several of the,
You have everything on here, yeah,
I tell you, I am a professional.
yeah.
And so, yeah, well, I like to give people a really good feel for what we're talking about. And here you've got a wonderful array of them. It must give you a real deeper, if you didn't already have, which I know you did, appreciation for each of the folks, a deeper understanding, appreciation of each of them and their lives, right? In writing these books.
Oh yeah, you get a much more three-dimensional picture of them because it's more than what you just see in a clipping or a press sheet. Um, and getting to know their families is extraordinary. Getting to know their ex-coworkers and getting to hear these stories that you would never hear otherwise about, the surprises that Bill would plan for his wife's birthday, or Dennis James making a mistake during a cigarette commercial and just being in tears about it when he was at a movie theater afterwards, or how Alan won over Betty White, or just all these little stories that make them more people and not just faces on your TV screen anymore. Just getting to actually know them as human beings is really, really gratifying and really fun in a lot of cases.
So your ultimate favorite game show, if you were to pick just the one, I think in the beginning of this conversation, you mentioned something, but what would be your,
You
or
know,
top five?
like I said, boy, my top five. And the funny thing is, I just did a podcast called Top 10, which is I had to assemble my top 10 favorite game shows.
Okay. Do you have the
And
top 10 still?
what I said at the beginning, what I said at the beginning of the interview was, you could ask me this on 3 consecutive days, and I would probably turn in 3 different lists.
It will change, right?
Yeah, but I would say top 5. The Price is Right, Wheel of Fortune, Press Your Luck, Match Game, and Pyramid probably would be the top 5.
Good ones.
Very fond
Yeah.
of all 5 of those shows. And
Remember Treasure Hunt with Jeff
yes,
Edwards?
yes,
Yes, that used to be on, I remember,
wild show,
7:30 on Channel
sort of
2
a
in
game
New
show
York.
and sort of also a parody of game shows.
Yes.
And just a very, very strange show, and hard to describe to anyone who hasn't seen it. But
Yeah.
a woman from the audience would be offered a chance to pick one of 30 boxes, and one of them was hiding a $25,000 check.
Yes.
And they would start to open the box, and
Yeah.
every time that they would start to open the box, there would be something interrupting the reveal of what was in the box, and they would drag out this interruption for 5 or 6 minutes with characters showing up or Jeff making them do something first, but it would be a whole other thing that would just, it would be a distraction to the contestant while they were trying to find out what they had won.
Yeah.
So barely a game show, but just very, very funny and very charming and
And the
very
set was cool
unusual
with all those boxes
with all those
too.
treasure boxes. Yeah.
Yeah. Now
Just
you
very
had
vivid and a
involvement
very
with
alive set. Yeah.
exactly right. The
Yeah.
colors were vibrant. I remember it was 7:30, I think, on Friday nights on Channel 2 in New York,
Yeah.
WCBS TV. Double Dare, you had some involvement with Double Dare?
Yes, I was a question researcher for the revival of Double Dare that was on the air a few years ago for Nickelodeon. Which really, one of my deathbed shows. That's one of the shows that I want to replay over and over again. Is my time working on that one. Um, on YouTube every now and then you'll find videos that are like an episode of Star Trek written and produced by a group of fans who got together and built their own recreations of the set and bought their own costumes or made their own costumes, and they make an episode of Star Trek. Okay, so imagine doing a fan tribute like that, but with the actual thing financing you. That's what Double Dare
Mm,
was. It
yeah.
was a staff of people who had grown up watching the original show and been fans of the original show, making their
Mhm.
own basically fan tribute, but making it as a new version of the series. And we had some incredibly brilliant minds making the physical challenges and coming up with the ideas for obstacles. It was exciting to have Mark Summers there, getting to oversee this and getting to be a part of creating this for a new generation of viewers. And I just loved the experience of getting to make that show and being able to say, I did this. I was a part of this.
How cool is that?
Yeah.
Absolutely. On the flip side, are there a few shows that are not your favorites, or where you would say, gee, maybe they should never have even put that one on the air? There's always the flip side list of life.
I can't say, because I do want to work, so I can't really speak that much negative publicly.
Like
I
Jackie
have seen,
Gleason. Remember he did
yeah,
that
yes,
show and he said, I want to apologize for last night. That
yeah,
show was
you're in the
a
picture.
bomb. That's a historic moment when he did that on the
Yeah,
Dumont
I mean,
Network. The Dumont
there are
Network.
certainly duds out there, but I can't speak on it. And the thing is, it must be there. I'm sure there are situations where a show has been great in the rehearsals, and then something doesn't work when it's on the air, and Jackie even talks about that. Yeah, Jackie says in that famous apology, because he spent 30 minutes apologizing for the show, and part of it was he really assured the audience this was good when we were doing it in an office. This played really well when it was in an office. And I've talked to somebody who worked for Goodson Todman in the 1970s, and he was there for a show called Mind Readers, which was one of the less successful shows from Mark Goodson, Bill Todman Productions. And basically, the idea was you were asked a hypothetical question about one of your teammates, and you had to predict how they would react to that hypothetical situation, and you were trying to predict it correctly. And basically, where they went wrong was, he said, in the office run throughs, we were using Goodson Todman staff. So our contestants were people who knew each other. And it played really, really well when it was people who knew each other. And then when it went on the air, we were using complete strangers as teammates, and celebrity guests teamed up with regular contestants. So the celebrity guests didn't know their partners. And it's just flipping a coin when it's somebody you don't know.
Yeah.
So that was the issue with mind readers. So that's an example of something can seem like a great idea and just crater when you actually do it for real. So sometimes you don't get a good picture of what the show is actually going to turn out to be.
What are some of the biggest things that have surprised you about just this whole industry, specifically game shows over the years?
Boy, um, how do you mean? Like being inside it, or being or researching it, or
Or just in maybe in terms of what you thought originally and then researching and archiving and celebrating some things that maybe you have enhanced your love of it,
yeah.
altered some things you thought previously.
Um, I did not realize how much the old way of doing things was gone. There are very, very few, like in the old days, the game show production companies were Bob Stewart Productions, where Bob Stewart is the boss. Mark Goodson, Bill Todman Productions, where the bosses are Mark Goodson and Bill Todman. And that's pretty much eroded. I mean, all game shows, they have a creator now, but it's part of a larger machine now. So the independent way of doing things has gone away. I've also learned from the people who work in the business and who have worked in the business for a lot of decades that networks are often more involved now than they were in the past. Some of the people that worked in the 1970s and the 2010s told me, when you put a show on the air in 1970s, NBC would say, "Okay, we're buying your show," and that was kind of it. They left you to run the show and put it together however you saw fit. Um, and today, the networks are very, very involved in every step of the production. So there's a lot more people to answer to now, and there's a lot more people that you need to please when you're getting an idea off the ground.
Exactly right. Yes. So cool, exciting things coming up for you with the GSN project, with the Gong Show book, and anything else that you have that's on the horizon that is on that bucket list of things you'd like to tackle, Adam?
I'm getting some Mediterranean food tonight, and I'm very excited about that.
Very, very nice.
um, I
Is that a
have
consolation prize or
yeah,
a?
we have a book that we're hoping to use as a promotional tie-in for the Strong Museum of Play and the National Archives of Game Show History. A book that we're hoping will be the official book of that archive, and I'm hoping you'll be able to hear about that in the next months or years. And also, I'm getting started on a biography of somebody else that I won't name at the moment, but I'm hoping to get that get the ball rolling on that. There is a key thing that I need for research that I'm trying to get my hands on right now, and there are several hoops that I have to jump through to get my hands on it. But if I can pull that off, there's going to be another book on the way after that. So
very cool.
A few possibilities here, but.
Well, let's definitely stay connected. This is your second visit in as many weeks here on the Jim Masters Show Live, and you were on the first time when we were paying homage to the iconic Bob Barker, and it was nice. And originally, for those who weren't with us when that show was live, and again, you can see it in the archives with almost 1,000 other episodes of our series, Adam was scheduled to be on that day, but then, of course, with the weekend passing of Bob Barker, we put together, I said, I really want to do a tribute episode to Bob Barker, of course, being on television 50 years and iconic, and being in the industry myself, just paying homage to one of the veterans of the industry. And we, got in contact with a few people, and I said, Adam, we're actually going to do a special on Bob Barker. Would you like to be a part of that? And then we will have you come back in just a couple of weeks, and then we'll do a full hour plus talking about game shows and television and entertainment and what you're working on and what you've done. So it was cool that you were able to come back and do that, and also join us for the Bob Barker tribute as well.
And that's still some of the most strange timing I've ever experienced in any of these bookings that I've ever gotten in my life. And I'm very relieved to know that a lot of the heavy hitters in game show history have lived to see this appearance on the Jim Masters Show.
Well, I was going to say, before I made sure that we created the graphics and everything for having you on tonight, that we checked the obituary pages from this past weekend to make sure there was no other things that we had to suddenly throw together. So other than your ceiling fan having to be. But that's
one day I'll have an appearance on the show that's totally unencumbered by anything going on in my life.
Right. That's exactly that's just
the dream.
That wind is cool air. This wind is hot air. It's a little bit different. Adam, you're the best. This really was cool. Thanks for all the time. Enjoy the Mediterranean food that's forthcoming. Spread the word continually about the Jim Masters Show series. We really appreciate that. As you know, it takes a village. And if you know other guests, Bob Bowden, anybody that you think would like to pop on, they're all welcome to join us. And truly, thanks for all the time and all the great stories and all the books as well. And they're all available, gang, on Amazon. So go get them there. They're all listed, and there's little backgrounds on them, and you can see all of it. And it's really, really cool. And thanks for keeping it all alive. As somebody that works in broadcast, I love people that have such an affinity for elements of this industry that they make it a part of their life and they really celebrate it in the way that you do. So cool stuff, Adam.
Yep.
We will see you again soon, okay?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks for being with us. You enjoyed the time?
Yes, I did. This was a blast.
Well, as my father has always said, please put that in writing and address it management. You be well. Take care, Adam. Thanks for joining us. We'll see you again soon.
See you.
Cheers. And of course, as we always say, we'll keep the porch light on for him as well. He's welcome back anytime. Hey, gang, if you enjoyed this episode of the Gym Masters Show live series, well, of course, there are almost 1,000 episodes of the Gym Masters Show live series that you can watch. They're all on our YouTube channel, Gym Masters TV. Yeah. Episodes with great guests from Hollywood, television, film, music, stage, Broadway, and culinary arts and sports and life in general, authors and historians and psychics and comedians and so much more. Again, if you enjoy the Gym Masters Show live series, we would love it if you would do this. Give it a like. Make sure you click the thumbs up button. We would love that. That really helps us here. The thumbs up button is really important, and it allows us to continue to grow the Gym Masters Show live series. And don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel, Gym Masters TV. Doesn't cost anything. Click the notification bell so that way you never miss any of the episodes of the Gym Masters Show live series, which is a production of Gym Masters Media. I'm your host and executive producer of our series, and love putting these shows together where we celebrate all kinds of cool things. Again, I love this particular area because, of working in television and radio myself as a broadcaster all these years. And here on the East Coast in the New York area, that's where the show comes from. Having an opportunity to talk to folks who, love the industry, love the different folks that are involved in it. I just think it's really, really cool. And this time we talked about some of your favorite game shows, the game show hosts, the folks involved in producing, and of course with Adam preserving it and celebrating it as well, which I think is really cool. And did you even know about that museum up in Rochester, New York? Yeah. How cool is that? He's the archivist at the National Archive of Game Show History at the Strong Museum of Play. Museumofplay.org is their website. And check that out. There's a lot of cool resources there as well. And again, Adam has had this love, ever since he grew up in West Virginia. He's had this love of all the game show hosts and just the game show format and how it's all put together. This book is going to be coming out right around the holidays. But as I mentioned, you can check out some of the other books. We had a great conversation, but we also had lots of laughs, lots of comparing notes of stories. I call these conversations, folks. Don't really call them interviews, even though it's a kind of an interview. I really call these conversations here on the Gym Masters Show Live. There's the Family Feud ticket, and he's had involvement, behind the scenes with the game shows as well, which I think is really, really cool. And yeah, he was going to be with us a couple of weeks ago, and then Bob Barker had passed. So I wanted to put together a special celebrating Bob Barker. And if you didn't see that episode, Wink Martindale, legendary game show host, was with us. Bob Barker's public relations person, Roger Neal, was with us as well with some amazing stories. And also Wesley Hyatt, who has written many books about some of your favorite television stars. Randy West, an announcer and so much more with game shows, including The Price is Right, was with us. Matter of fact, that was his second visit on our show. And then Adam was going to be a guest, and we were going to do an episode with Adam talking about game shows. But then he joined us for the Bob Barker tribute special, which was really terrific. And then I said, you know what, let's look at a date and have you come back and we can talk about your work and the books and all the other cool things, again, right here on the Gym Masters Show Live. Spread the word. If you enjoy these episodes, you enjoy our series, don't keep it a secret. Let everybody know. That helps us grow with all these hours and hours and hours of content we have coming at you here with all these great guests. Don't forget, you can always support what we do in the chat as the shows are live with the super chat, super emoji, super stickers, and all that fun stuff. And also the super thanks on YouTube. But definitely leave a comment, interact with us. Let us know what you enjoyed about this show. Say hello, leave a comment on the YouTube channel, thumbs up, subscribe, and all the rest. For all of us here, this is Jim Masters thanking you for your time this time. Till next time. Hope you enjoyed the episode and all the great commentary. Kathleen in New York, Kathleen Walker. This has been great. Thanks for being here, Adam. Thank you for being here, Kathleen. Thank you, Jim, for another super show. Thank you, Christine Clifton. Thanks, Jim and Adam, for this entertaining show. Game shows are fun for all ages. Yes, they are. Lisa, thank you very much as well. Nice to see you, Lisa. And everybody watching from all around the world here on the Jim Masters Show live series. All right, we're going to duck out. Thank you for watching the Jim Masters Show live series. We'll be back. We've got lots of great guests coming up for all of you right here in Lovety Hall, Jameis Lovety Hall on the Jim Masters Show. Thanks for being with us. We appreciate you being here. We love having you stop by our show. Spread the word, and I'll be right here waiting for you for the next episode of JMS, the Jim Masters Show Live. Take care and be well. And cheers.